We're gonna do it together because both bikes will pretty much be done. And we'll talk a lot of crap to each other. Well, hey guys, welcome back to Casey and Peyton's Bike Build-Off. We're back for the progress on the $700 Ducati that was laid down, the 900 SS from 1995. So for the people who were wondering how we're gonna paint it, I think you see where this is starting to go. Did the black frame, and it's going to end up being a red bike. Keeping it really tasteful, kind of understated in that regard. Of course, you can see the exhaust. I've done it in the high temperature flat white. It's gonna be absolutely impossible to keep clean, but it's really cool. Really harkens back to that sort of late 60s Formula One Ferraris, which of course you can see the nature of how ended up doing the wheels in that very nice, like subtle gold metallic here. Also, I went a little further than that, just kind of cleaning up an old bike, but making it look nice without just throwing money at parts. Took the clutch, the major disc off, the pressure plate, shall we say, and finished it with paint. Kind of did it by hand, mixed a couple. So give it a bit of an anodized look. Oftentimes the Italians with motorcycles and high-end ones, they would coat their magnesium parts in gold and such. So it's got a good Italian look, kind of tying it in together with the wheels. Didn't want to get too gaudy, too colorful with that regard. So I did the retainers, the spring retainers and the springs in black. I think it looks really nice. I'm not going to run a clutch cover because, you know, tuck in your shoelaces and don't be a sissy. It looks really cool to see it spinning around. And of course, for all you Ducati fans out there, we love that banging mechanical dry clutch sound there. Also, some other tasteful little details which I really enjoyed. I took the plastic cam belt covers and simply painted them wrinkle black. You can buy them at any auto parts store, the wrinkle black paint. A good tip for that is I like to do 2 heavy coats, wait a few minutes in between, and then I use a heat gun and slowly heat it up, and you can watch it wrinkle before your very eyes. So you don't have to worry about just leaving it overnight with the possibility of it not wrinkling in places. So good tip there. Anyway, did the frame, came out really nice, and as you guys can see, I ditched the monoshock and went for twin shocks in the rear. I know some of you are gonna freak out, but hey, come on. I've raced motorcycles a little bit in the past, raced cars, and this is what I wanna do. It's gonna ride just fine, and I think we're gonna be okay with the frame and not having cracks either. As you can see, this part of the frame here in the rear is all of the stock parts. And so we've got a node right here where it attaches to the motor, and of course the other node here, and it's nicely triangulated. So all of this coming back here, you know, it's properly triangulated, comes to do 2 things, effectively support the seat and rider, as well as the shocks. So in the back, you can see pictures I've got. I made a gusset out of rectangular tubing in the back here that I could weld and fit on nicely, and then drilled it so that I could run a grade 8 or a really strong bolt all the way through, welded it on both sides there, on the inside of the gusset so you don't see the weld, and it's a nice flat, even face for the shock to mount up. So it's very strong. That's your focal point back there. And for all you vintage Ducati fans, you'll notice the pickup point on the frame for the rear shock in relation to the seat, and the seat back is effectively the same place it was on those 1970 750 bikes we all like so much. Of course, the shock mount on the swing arm in the rear was that same rectangular square tubing and simply welded on nicely. It fit flushly and kind of carried on that vertical plane on the inside and outside. I was able to do it with good clearance to the chain as well as the sprocket and sprocket bolts, and even still have access to my caliper bolts in the rear. The monoshock triangulation was able to come off really nicely. And of course you lose a little bit of stiffness with regard to the swing arm, but if you have decent shocks, it's gonna work out well. And let's be honest, how many of us are really good enough road racing motorcycle racers to hardly notice? The shocks, they're not the greatest in the world. Frankly, I had them left over from a Triumph build. Oh, I know, horrors that came from an English bike. But on the plus side, they fit great, they're exact right length, they look good. I had them, so they were effectively free to me, which goes a long way. But I can call up about any places and simply order Triumph Thruxton or Bonneville shocks, so I can get some nice Oleans or something in the future if I really want to. But it looks great, and I feel really real confident in it. In terms of the frame, I also gusseted that lower pickup point where the node is also supporting the rear exhaust. I don't see that putting a lot of stress on the frame, but it is an extra pickup point there and a gusset there. So I think we're gonna be really good. Also, with regard to the frame paint, I went with a single stage gloss black. So if in the future I ever need to fix a crack or add a gusset or maybe weld on a mounting tab, it's really easy to clean it down. to the bare metal, weld that on, and then respray it. It's gonna look like $1 million. The other thing with regard to the Ducatis, the trellis frames from this time period, and especially the 900 SSs of the 90s, the head tube up here, or your steer tube, where your entire front fork goes through, a lot of stress going in there. You got all your braking forces, you got, juddering, impact loads for suspension banging around, and just everything. A lot of stress going through there. And the nature of how these frames were welded, being steel, looked to be MIG welded at the time. When you electric weld something, you put a massive amount of heat in a tiny area. And the metallurgy changes the hardness of the metal in those places, and they'll crack. And these motorcycles are well known for cracking badly where the frame comes up there. So, and this one was no exception, especially since it was laid down. It propagated the cracks even bigger. So I gusseted the lower part and the upper part. On the upper, I did it on both the inside and the outside, just to be extra certain, because that's where they crack the most. And I feel rather confident. I think it's going to be really good. This is going to be a street bike of mine. Who knows, maybe I'll take it out on the road course just for fun one day. But I think it's going to be really good. Beyond that, I had 2 surprises that were a little annoying so far. You take a risk when you buy a laid down bike. The chassis had just a little bit of tweak to it, which I was able to bring back. Barely any, but and for most builders you wouldn't even notice or not. Hence my Instagram picture, some of you noticed, it looks like I was giving birth to a frame. I was actually holding it with my feet and eyeballing for parallel lines and 90-degree angles. The human eye is really good at seeing 90-degree angles and also parallel lines, so keep that in mind. Anybody out there that's a marksman or is used to shooting with iron sights, probably pretty good at it already. Going beyond that, I found out after refinishing the wheel myself that this wheel's trashed. It's got a nick in it. I don't know if you can see it. Nope, not on this side, but a lot of wobble. I took it to get the tires mounted and it's just womp, 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 womp. So tracked another one down. It's coming. Gonna have to paint that again, but c'est la vie. That's what happens with your building vintage and custom things now and then. So carrying on, actually the stock brakes look pretty good. I kind of like the aesthetic going on with the wheel, so I'm gonna leave that alone. I was really happy with the way the gold turned out. So, and it stops nice. It works nice all there. A personal touch that I really enjoyed, my first motorcycle was a 1965 Ducati 350 Sebring. It was a single CC, it was cafe racered out. I loved it. It never charged properly, ran right maybe half the time. So that's the best way to keep kids safe. Get them a cantankerous single-cylinder Italian motorcycle that they don't really have a manual for, because the internet wasn't that big a thing back then. Anyway, but on those old singles, the Ducati foot pegs were really cool. They're kind of square, and they had embossed letters that said Ducati in the old font. So me being me, and not necessarily want to spending money on some really expensive CNC machined foot pegs and rear sets, I decided, hey, I'm just going to modify my pegs to take the old slide and rubber covers. So we'll call that a Casey, a Casey detail. Just going back to the 50s and 60s with those pegs. I like it. I think it's pretty charming. Really adds to the motorcycle. Of course, the rear, I did turn signals. I actually had those left over. They're kind of a nice bullet shape. They look pretty vintage, but being small, sporty, fast. Grabbed myself a rear brake light from Dime City. They've got a lot of good choices there. It's going to be fun. I think I'm probably just going to take my license plate, turn it 90 degrees to vertical, and mount it off of one of the rear shock bolts, stick it kind of in the swing arm, because technically that's actually legal. And who wants a license plate on your nice, pretty motorcycle? Anyway. So going beyond that though, so we're getting to the part where we got to get serious. So the fenders actually on the Super Sport, it had the carbon fiber one as well as the original red one. So, it's not super vintage looking, but it's a nice shape. So we're going to find out when it has all the red, how much will it balance out? It's possible that just swapping out for the stock red fender will end up looking pretty good. But for right now, the carbon fiber looks nice. It was a little bit tired, so I cleaned it with some basic thinner, and I clear coated it. Really makes it look like $1 million. Going to give it another coat. Now the rear fender that was on the monoshock swing arm, when it had that triangulation, would sit about like this. So this went up where the monoshock was. Since I cut that out, I did find that you can put it all the way up in there, about like so. I'm going to have to modify it for where the chain comes by. I'll probably put some sort of metal support, maybe something polished aluminum, but it's going to look good. I like the carbon, actually, even though it's not vintage. I'm not a super big carbon guy. Like, race cars are all carbon, so get over yourself. It's not actually fashion. But in this circumstance, it's black, and it has a nice texture and look, and it sort of blends away. And by having this little Fenderette kind of in there, it's gonna keep all the crap from getting on the back of your motor, so your bike's gonna look nicer when you actually ride it like a real person. So I think I'm probably gonna go that way. Even though this looks nice and racy and vintage and cool, I still want it to be clean and ride it. So that's, I think, where I'm gonna go with that. Beyond that, so this front fairing is a mold directly off of one of the old Super Sports, so it's correct, got a nice windscreen there. I got a proper fitting headlight, and that actually, I got that from Dime City too. I wish I got sponsored by them, but I don't. Maybe I shouldn't tell you that. But want to hook you guys out, want to help you out. So that's gonna look really nice. It fits in there quite well. And if some of you saw the cardboard I had on the bike for this area, what I hate about some of these cafe racer builds, especially on these Ducatis, people do such a great job with details and all, but they do such a crappy job with like the tank and the frame and fabrication. And what I mean to say is, this tank was designed for motorcycle in the 90s with 90s styling. So if you just go hanging this old fairing on it, let's see if I can do this good without like knocking the bike over. Right, so you hang that on, it looks pretty good, except you got this big open area. And it doesn't follow the elements and principles of design. It doesn't really sweep with it. So what I'm gonna do is, if you look at the seat and the lower line here, effectively, and you interpolate these points in this line right here, I wanna fill that in. I want that tank to be bigger. But the problem is, and when I was originally gonna build this bike, I thought, how can I put a 70s tank on one of these? And you can't. Because this trellis frame, as you see, effectively creates a big trapezoidal box here. And if I were to totally modify all this so that from the steer tube here, I went to these pickup points on the motor and then ran a big tube down the middle like an old school bike, I could do it and it'd be all right. And I could make it stiff enough. But then your carburetors and your manifolds are all in the way because that's different. So I want to keep the frame the same way. But there's no tanks that fit the frame well. Now, some of you Ducati guys will know there's some places out in England, I think Red Max, they make some pretty good tanks that look decent on a frame like this or a Monster. But in my own personal opinion, I don't like the way they fit. I think they sit up way too high, look a little ungainly. I mean, they make really pretty bikes, so I'm not knocking them at all. But just for me, I'm kind of a pain in the butt snob. So I want it to be so. But it hit me, I'm like, if I wasn't gonna use this tank anyway, what's the harm in modifying it? So what I'm gonna do is metal that comes right down here that nicely carries this line across. It'll slightly roll here, roll in the bottom. And I'm gonna use panel bonding adhesive actually to attach it here. And then if I nicely sand that and use filler, it's gonna work great. And it's gonna look like $1,000,000. I'm gonna go with a single stage red. I want it to be nice and glossy, but I also want kind of a vintage feel, kind of that sort of warm, soft look. And that's also easy to repair. So if I ever whack it really hard with my knee or something and it happened to crack a little, I can fix it easily. But frankly, I don't see that happening. And that's gonna look really nice. It's gonna kind of cover where you see the carbs and all. It's gonna carry the line forward. And I got the old school Ducati decals on the tank. I'm not quite sure of it because this tank has got some swoopy down lines. So probably have to find a place to put it on, kind of like that. I thought about getting kind of racy, put it on a funny angle, but you know, this is a really clean Ducati. Just a simple black frame, got the old school pegs, nice white mufflers. You know, it's gonna be speedy and glamorous, but without really trying too hard. And in that manner, I've gotta give Peyton some credit because he was really kicking my butt. And he's like, dude, you gotta paint the frame black. You're gonna be too flashy. Because I kept thinking about painting the frame red, like the Mike Halewood MH900E that I had a long time ago that I really liked, or even like maybe gold, because you know they did magnesium and stuff. But Peyton's like, dude, black, just stop. And it does look like $1,000,000. So remember, guys, when you're doing your bike build and you really want to go that extra step with color or whatnot, you might want to just rein it back in. Just, you know, don't turn it up to 11, bring it back to like a 9, and it's gonna look so much better and more tasteful. And that's exactly where we're at. Other than that, it's just basically detailing and getting everything set up. If you notice the tubing underneath the seat back there, under the bottom, that's actually tubing that was left over from what I cut off the bike. And I mean, I had to cut it in a bunch of places and grind and smooth. So the angle grinder became my best buddy. Not because I can't weld, but because, you know, when you weld them together, you want to make it smooth again and seamless. And all that tube is doing in the back anyway is supporting your taillights. So, hey, welding trolls, don't give me a crap on that. It's going to be really nice. Anyway, got these natural gum rubber grips. I really like that. And I was intending on doing the seat in a real warm kind of orangey suede orangey tan suede. But I think I'm probably going to do it in black leather, maybe with red stitching, red diamond stitching. Just keep it a little subtle. Plus I'm filthy half the time anyway, so I'll get the seat ugly. Not because it scares the crap out of me, just because I work in a shop. So that's really it, guys. I think if I get some time, I mean, we're jammed with projects here in Genius Garage, and for any of you really detail-oriented guys, maybe you see something lurking in the shadows over there. But I thought about doing some gold leaf work on the carbon fenders. I thought that might be cool. Maybe like 2 gold leaf stripes and then cleared over. But send me your suggestions. I appreciate it. If you hate it, just keep it to yourself. But I think it's going really well. I hope this inspires you guys to do more. As a note, I do have to point out, so of course this started with $700, but then you got to pay your tax, like 7%. So, you know, once I bought the seat, I think it might have been $150 for the fiberglass seat. And then this was, oh, who knows, maybe $200, something like that. So you start getting a little bit of money in it there. You know, that's the better part of $400. Then you buy all the little things. You got to get clip-ons. My levers were broken. Had to get a battery for it. Had to get a new chain. The wheel was junk. Had to find one for $100. So you start spending some money on a bike like that. Not to mention that, but massive amounts of time. And time that requires expertise of craftsmanship and art choices. So what I'm saying is, I want this to inspire all you young fabricators, engineers, artists to do your own build. Because especially at that stage in your life where you have more time, but maybe not that much money. That's where you really got to use your head. You know, work on your skills, learn from others, develop them, really think about it, and make something your own. You can definitely do that. But that being said, don't think you're gonna buy the bike from me for what I've got in it, because people's time and expertise in art is worth quite a lot of money. So in a manner of speaking for me, when in the past I sold the Pulse Smart 1000 I had that I love so much, and my Mike Halewood, that really hurt because I love those bikes and I loved riding them and I work hard to get them. But I cared more about Genius Garage and building something bigger for the future with people. So, you know, they had to go because I'm a real person that's not independently wealthy. So this is really nice for me personally because I haven't got to do something just for myself because I enjoy it with my own talent in a long time. Or have a bike really cool just because I wanted it in a long time. So even though I'll have a smaller amount of money in it, material-wise, it's neat that I can take my experience and expertise to build exactly what I want. And I hope you guys enjoy it too. That frankly is gonna be every bit as cool, if not cooler, and as valuable as a Paul Smart or Mike Halewood anyway. So I hope that's a good lesson to you young guys out there. Peyton's doing an amazing job. So I look forward to connect with you again. I think probably the next video, we're gonna do it together because both bikes will pretty much be done. And we'll talk a lot of crap to each other and show you what it's at before we go to Mid-Ohio. So that's the update on the Ducati, guys. I hope you like this video, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.